What is up, Unleashed CEO family? Hey guys, welcome to today's episode of the Unleashed CEO Show. And I am so excited to share with you two things today. One is my good friend, Justin Eckrich, founder and CEO of Appliance Repair Marketing. Justin is such a treat, so full of wisdom and knowledge, and has built a really incredible business in a really, really cool niche. Although he's not by any means done, serial entrepreneur that he is. But I'm also excited to share not just Justin with you, but his story today of finding and hiring his implementer. And in recent days, Justin, I think you know this, we've helped lots of clients, kind of throughout the last 2 years, kind of find and hire an implementation team to come alongside the entrepreneurial owner and help them scale. But we've really started to see this pattern and trend where like our clients who experience the most exponential growth are the ones who nail this hire. And so we get asked all the time, how do I find and hire like this implementation minded, management minded counterpart to balance out my entrepreneurial craziness? And you and I are about as crazy as we come when it comes to entrepreneurship. So I'm just so excited that you were willing to take some time. I know you're a busy guy. I know you have a family. And I'm just really excited to share your story with our community and share some of the wisdom that have come out of some of our conversations. So Justin, thanks for being on the Unleashed CEO show today.
So I'm going to try to contain that craziness a little bit. Um, but at the same time, this is Unleashed CEO. So let's see
Right.
what happens. I'm
Let's see
excited
what
about it.
happens.
Yeah.
Well, super glad you're here, man. I guess I know all the amazing things you've done and built, how you've built, a multi-seven-figure business from scratch, right, in a really, really cool niche. There's not really, honestly, man, when I look at the market, there's a lot of people doing, in theory, what you guys are doing, right? Lead gen for a specific niche of, a service-based business. But I think the way you guys do it is so unique and differentiated. And just honestly, having you as a client and getting knee deep, I can tell how much you guys deeply care and what a profound impact you guys make in your clients' lives. And so, if you can, man, just tell us a little bit about just a little bit about you and about your company before we get going today.
So I'm not going to go all the way back, but I think this is probably relevant. So I'm from the generation where I think a lot of your audience is from, 2007. I started studying internet marketing and following, there's this, it was almost like this era, there was this era where everybody started getting into internet marketing. I started following, a lot of the gurus back then and really latched on to Perry Marshall and
Mm,
started studying online marketing and reading, 4 Hour Work Week. And I think that's where a lot of us start as entrepreneurs is that we have the sales and marketing side. I think it comes naturally to a lot of us.
mm,
And so that's where we start and we get our business off the ground just through our, natural sales and marketing ability. And then we realize, oh crap, I got to manage this thing. Right. And so the next stage of that is really about learning operations and systems and processes and hiring. And I'm sure a lot of your audience has read E-Myth, and some of those other earlier books about systems and processes. And then, what happens is it's supposed to be a path to freedom. And those systems and processes end up becoming the prison, that we build for ourselves. And, early on we're thinking, our ambition is to change the world. And we have these grandiose ideas of, freedom and profits and making an impact and changing the world and all this stuff. And then, years pass by and we're still on that hamster wheel and we're stuck. And, I think the evolution there, if you go back to that era, I think now we're entering into a new era. I think there's a lot of those same entrepreneurs back from 2007, 2008, 2009, when we started and got really good at marketing. We had to figure out by default how to get really good at operations. Some of us were able to do that, but the reality is we're visionaries, we're not operators, you know? And so even if we get somewhat good at operations, we're not in our zone of genius, we're not in our wheelhouse. And so we end up in a compromising situation where we're not being fulfilled and energized, and we're not in that creative, you know, place of productivity and creation. We're not creating, you know, and that's what we long for. And
Mm.
so every single day we go to the office, we get stuck in the weeds and we're managing the team and managing processes, managing systems, and we leave absolutely depleted,
Mm.
drained, burned out, you know. And the reality is we've got to travel through that space to figure out operations and be competent enough and well and strong enough so we can actually hand that off to somebody. And so that's been this process. It's taken years because I read EOS probably back in 2015, the book Traction, and then the book, what's the other one, Richard?
Rocket fuel.
Rocket Fuel. So I read both of those back in like 2015, maybe. And I was so anxious, you know, when I discovered I'm a visionary, you know, it's like this breakthrough moment for me.
Right.
I'm
There's
like,
other
yes,
people like me. Oh my gosh.
somebody knows me. They know me. Uh, I felt heard. I felt recognized. And so I went on this quest to figure out who is my implementer. And I was so desperate to find my implementer. It was like, okay, you're my implementer. You're my implementer. You're my implementer. And I couldn't quite figure this thing out. And so it's been a long process. And, you know, the first time we talked about this, I said, really, it's more about me growing as a visionary and an entrepreneur. And as I've matured through this process with lots of bumps and mistakes and, you know, bruises, I've learned and matured and grown. And as I've grown as an entrepreneur and as I've grown as a visionary, all of a sudden, here comes our implementer, you know, and it was like, um, you know, the adage, whenever the student's ready, the teacher appears. Same principle, right? Same principle. Another really good principle, Richard, is like,
Hold
you know,
on, you
when you,
got to stay on that one, dude, because that's so good. Hold on, that
yeah,
is so good. I
I'm
just took like a
expounding,
page of notes on that. That was
I'm, ex-
awesome.
I'm expounding on it right now. So this is the other thing that I experienced is it's a lot like dating, right?
Mm.
Same vein. When you're young and passionate and you're wanting to find that mate, you're desperately searching and you're
Mm.
looking and you're obsessing over it, you know. And the reality is, what I found is when you focus on yourself and you become the person
Mm.
that your ideal mate would be attracted to,
Mm.
suddenly then they'll show up in your life, you know. And it's not about necessarily finding that person, it's about becoming the person,
Mm.
right? And so in my experience as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a visionary in all facets, you know, as I focus on myself and as I focus on my own personal development and my own personal maturity and my personal growth, that's when my business grows, you know. And
Wow.
the interesting thing about that, whenever I try to grow my business and I focus on my business, it just stalls out. So, you know, I think there's something there to be said about, you know, universal law or the law of attraction or just universal principles. I mean, this is how the world, when you elevate beyond, you know, that place of reason and logic and you start operating in spiritual principles, these are those spiritual principles at work
Mm.
in a way that you don't necessarily have direct control over, right?
Mm.
You have control over yourself, but you can't necessarily control the outcome and the timing. And so, you know, let go, surrender, focus on what you can focus on, work on yourself. And as you work on yourself, the world around you will change. And then suddenly, you know, as you go through that process, that implementer will show up.
Wow. That was so good. This is such an excellent conversation. And Justin, thanks so much for, harping on that. I love how you said, I just want to recap a couple things you said because I think they're really, really key. You said sales ability gets you started, but then operations becomes a necessity. You actually have to master that skill set. But at a certain point, systems actually become the prison. Wow,
Mm.
what an incredible thought, because I think in a lot of entrepreneurial circles, there's sort of this like weird myth that like systems are the savior, right? And it's like, oh, like systems as an entrepreneur will save you. And almost feel like um, a lot of entrepreneurs spend a lot of time going down that road, not realizing that systems still require someone to manage them, right? Like you do not have a system. The way I actually define a system is when an aspect of your vision gets done without you doing it. And it's like the only way that's possible is actually building a self-managing team around that's centralized, yes, around systems instead of you. But if you ignore assembling the right team, all the systems in the world won't save you, right? You're still going to get pulled back in the weeds every time somebody doesn't follow the system, every time something breaks, every time, whatever. And I've been behind the scenes of a lot of multi-million dollar businesses where the owner is still 100% imprisoned by their systems because they have not been able to find their implementer. And that leads me to something else you said, man, which I think is so, so powerful, which is this idea that when you make the identity shift and the developmental shift, as we say, from chief everything officer to unleashed CEO, right? You grow into your role of what your company actually needs you to be, and you make the shift. When you make that shift, you actually make space for an implementer in your company. That's what I heard you say. And I think most people don't understand that right now, their company, with the level of control that they have in their company, there is actually not space for the right kind of person to come alongside until they're truly willing to elevate. So one of my questions, man, for you that I really wanted to dive into is this idea of control, because you and I talked about this, right? Where it's like a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with this idea of hiring a higher level person and actually having them come in and kind of take over the day-to-day of their business. How do you think about now, and how did you navigate the feelings of uncertainty, the feelings of, the questions and objections that came up around giving up control of the day-to-day? How do you think about that, and how did you handle that?
I think so. I'm going to do my best to answer this. This is such a multifaceted question, and I have a lot floating around in my head right now. So, um, this is something that me and Grayson's my implementer. This is something that we have kind of coined, between us, and that this is language that him and I use quite frequently, and we know what it means. So I'm going to try to translate that to you. And so initially, when you first start building that business, you hire people around you to complement your weaknesses, right? There's certain things that maybe you're not good at as a business owner, mostly administrative, maybe graphic design, maybe um, it could be coding or development coding, building landing pages, or, building the tech side of it. Whatever it is, you start hiring people to complement your weaknesses. And the way that I think about this now, those are hands. Okay. You hire them to do the work. You don't hire them to think about the work, and you don't hire them to manage the work. You hire them to do the work. So they become an extension of you to give you more capacity within your ability to do. Okay. But as you hire more hands and your capacity to do increases, your capacity to think decreases, because now you have to manage those hands, right?
Mm.
There's going to be a certain point when you bring on more and more hands that your ability to think becomes less and less. So your capacity to imagine, and your capacity to be creative, and your capacity to build, and your capacity to strategize, and your capacity to make decisions gets smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point where, even though you're gaining capacity to do, if you're not gaining capacity to think, eventually that's where you end up building a prison, right?
Mm,
So the implementer is actually not a hand, it's another brain.
mm,
Okay, that's a very important distinction. It's not enough to bring in somebody else to be a hand or an extension of the work. You have to bring in somebody else who can be a thinker, right?
mm,
And so the coin that we phrased here, or the phrase that we've coined here, we call this 2D thinkers and 3D thinkers. Okay.
mm,
In his previous work, he was an engineering manager. And one of the softwares that they used was CAD, and CAD has a 2D option and a 3D option.
mm,
Okay. The 2D option is very linear. You can see the dimension in front of you, right? It's a flat dimension. You can't see the whole thing though, right? And so, you know, I think that makes for a really good analogy between the hands and the brains, right?
mm.
And so with 2D thinkers, people who can only think linearly, they only see linearly. They don't understand the depth and the holistic component of your business or their role or the department for that matter.
Mm.
They just know, hey, here's your task and go do it, right? That's the
Right.
way that they operate.
Mm,
Um, the implementer is not that, right? The implementer is actually somebody who comes along and sees the business like you do, right? They have an ownership sort of mentality. They have an ownership spirit. They have an ownership level of responsibility and buy-in. And so this person comes in and they're an extension of your brain. They're an extension of your spirit. They're an extension of your being, right? And the interesting thing is, with visionaries and integrators, there's a lot of overlap. A visionary has some capacity to be an integrator. It's not their primary strength, but there is capacity there, right?
mm,
Same thing with the integrator. The integrator does have some visionary power. There's overlap. So that's what this magical relationship is, where, organically, I had to learn by default, I had to learn operations.
mm.
I didn't have a choice. The integrator, and through our experience and our talking and conversation and time working together, he started out thinking he was a visionary, you
Mm,
know, and over time he's realized and grown into and accepted that he's really an integrator, right?
mm,
And so there's this perfect marriage where he knows how to speak my language, I know how to speak his language, but his wheelhouse is in operations. My wheelhouse is in, visioning or in the visionary role. Right. So, um, I think that really, I think that's a good enough answer for now.
That was such a great answer, man. And I love what you just said because, whether you call it implementer or integrator, Gino Wickman's term is integrator. I always talk to business owners and they're like, I have no idea what that means, but what I
Yep.
need is somebody who can implement my vision. And what you said there is so key. Is it's like the implementer sees in 3D. The big difference for this is like another analogy here that has always been helpful for me is like visionaries typically see see the forest, not the trees, right? But you actually need somebody who's like sees the trees and some level actually can kind of see the grass too. And I think what you said, man, is so key, which is like you need somebody who sees in 3D, right? Who actually has the capacity to elevate the level of thinking in your business as the capacity for doing grows. And they have to actually act like an owner and be bought in with the vision. I love this. It wrote down they're an extension of your brain, brand, and being. And I
Mm.
thought that was so good, right? Um, so I guess I'm curious, man. One of the dynamics with my implementer, right, that has been really helpful is understanding the difference between being in charge and being in control. And Gino Wickman and Mark Winters kind of popularized this concept in the book Rocket Fuel, but it's been so helpful for us. And the way they say it is that like the visionary is in charge, but the implementer is in control. And in my, company, the way that's played out is, I'm in charge. Like I actually carry the charge for our company. I'm the guardian and champion of our vision and our culture. Brock passes pretty much any kind of strategic change through me. He actually reports to me and is accountable to me. And he is accountable to me when it comes to vision, culture, team alignment. Like I'm in charge. But when it actually comes to the day to day, I don't control anything. Like I'm actually not in control of anything. So I'm sort of able to walk in my unique ability, lead from the front, do things like this, build strategic partnerships, actually think and work on the business for what not necessarily has to get done today or this week or this month, but what has to get done over the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, to get us to our big impact vision. And then I'm able to bring that back to Brock as the implementer and go, here's where we're headed, here's the vision. And then Brock actually is the one, though, and this is where the control comes. So I'm in charge of what we're doing and where we're going, but he's in control of how and when that happens and the speed and cadence. And one last analogy we use is like I'm like a lot of times like I'm like the pioneer and the scout going out into the future and figuring out where our company needs to go ahead of time and then coming back. But he's the one, as far as the army, who's beating the drum as far as how fast we march so that we actually get there and don't die on the way. Like that the whole company actually stays together marching in the direction of the vision that I scouted out ahead. So how has that dynamic, begun to play out between you and Grayson? How do you guys feel like you've been able to navigate? Well, specifically, one of the things I wanted to know about you guys is like, you've got a lot of vision in you. You've got a lot of even other ideas, maybe even other companies inside of you, which a lot of our clients have that. They're serial entrepreneurs. What would you say to someone now having an implementer who doesn't have one when it comes to actually find like the priority of finding that person before they go try to pursue all of these other visions or different things? What would you say to that person? Because I think that's a big struggle for a lot of our audience.
So here's the gap for me as a visionary. I have a million ideas a day. I have 10,000 notebooks full of ideas that are sitting on the shelf. My digital backlog has thousands of items on it. And eventually got to the point where I realized I don't have the capacity to fulfill any of these things because I'm locked in the business. I'm trapped in the business. I'm running the day to day. I'm making the decisions. I'm leading the troops. I'm managing the details, and it's exhausting because that's not my strength, right? There was a certain point where it was energizing because it was new for me and I was learning something new and it was a new challenge. But then whenever, 12 months turns into 24 months, turns into 36 months, eventually it's like, okay, something has to change here, because initially I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially bootstrap entrepreneurs who are doing this for the first time, this is our learning. This is our learning experience. That first business, this is what I call my starter business. Okay. I'm learning how to be a business owner right now. I'm learning how to lead a team. I'm learning how to build a team. I'm learning processes and systems. And so this is my real world experience. But I live in the future, right? My brain and my being is always 3 to 5 years in the future, looking out, looking for those opportunities, looking for that direction, looking for where we're headed and what we're going to do and what's possible. And the reality is that I was stuck in the past as an operator,
Mm-hmm.
right? Systems and processes are not what build the future. Systems and processes are what manage the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what exists in my business is in the past because it's already built.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, I think, a strong differentiator, because the implementer, they manage the past essentially, right? They manage what is. That's their job. And they're really good at being in the present, and in today. But you can't do both at the same time very well. We reached a point in our business where I wasn't being the visionary or the implementer very well, because I had reached my capacity. I was incapacitated, right? And so as I started to really recognize and be aware of my limited capacity, that's when I started to realize something's wrong here. I'm not doing something right. And I need to figure out how to hand this off to somebody. And so, for me, it was really a journey of, I was pursuing answers while I was pursuing character and identity, right? I needed to really become that person. And, I knew that I'm not an operator. I'm not an operator. This doesn't energize me. It's not fun. It's not exciting anymore. And I'm not doing a very good job, And so what I started noticing are the patterns and trends where I was falling short. And that became the definition of who the implementer was going to be. Where are all the areas where I am not operating the way that I should be right now? Where are the deficiencies in our business? Where are the deficiencies within the day-to-day? And you said something earlier about beating the drum, and that is another, that's the exact language that we use, and I wasn't very good at it. Yeah. And so I realized I need somebody to beat the drum. I need somebody to rally the troops. I need somebody to encourage the team. I need somebody to hold them accountable. I need somebody to check in with them daily. I need somebody to have, to be in our weekly team meetings. I need somebody to do one-on-ones. I need somebody to, make sure that our team is in alignment and, and encouraged and doing their work, and that they have somebody that they can go to besides me to answer their questions day in and day out, help them, make decisions, help them think, help them do their job better, because that's what I was doing day in and day out. And that I realized that's not my role as a visionary, One more thing, Richard, that you mentioned a minute ago is working on your business versus in your business. As a first-time entrepreneur, I think a lot of us don't understand what that means. And we think that systems and processes are working on the business, right? And maybe there's a season where that's true. If you don't have any systems or processes at all, yeah, that is the best version of working on your business at that moment. But once you have some systems and processes, for you to be the one managing those systems and processes is no longer working on the business. Now you're working in the business and you don't even realize it, right? And so for me, I think, and again, I'm just speaking from my own experience. Maybe this isn't true for everybody, but that's the trap that I fell into. And I realized if I'm in the operations, in the day-to-day, I'm not working on the business, I'm in the business. And in order for me to work on the business truly, I have to be in my visionary seat. In order for me to be in my visionary seat, somebody else has to come in and take over these duties that I'm managing, right now. And I think that was part of that evolution of realizing what an implementer actually is.
So powerful, man. I think one of the things that gets missed in this conversation so often is something you just said, which is people don't realize that, you didn't say it this way, but the goals and ambitions they actually have for their business are fundamentally impossible if they're not sitting in their visionary seat. Like, the only way entrepreneurial progress truly happens at scale is through the CEO stepping into that visionary seat and actually going out into the future and clearing the roadblocks. And actually, like, that's how exponential progress actually happens in entrepreneurship. But we forget that when we've been mired in the weeds for so long, that that's just become normalized to us. And then we feel this growing gap of frustration where it's like, I'm disappointed at our results, or I feel like I've plateaued, or man, maybe even the company still is growing because you're in a fast growing market, but you have zero time freedom, right? Like zero. Your life is just consumed by your business. And I think like it's really important to know that if your business feels that way, your business is lacking a visionary and you're probably in the wrong seat as the implementer. And I think it's really tough for a lot of entrepreneurs to admit that. In fact, I think some entrepreneurs actually feel a lot of shame about this and they haven't even totally verbalized it or acknowledged it because they feel like they should be able to do it all. They feel like they should be enough. And one of the most empowering discoveries for me in my entrepreneurial journey was that I'm not good at everything. I'm not a great manager. I can't do it all. And as soon as I began to really own and admit the areas that I wasn't good, and I gave myself permission to step into the areas that I was a 10 in and go all in on that, as Dan Sullivan calls it, your unique ability, was when explosive growth began to happen for our business. And I've seen that time and time again. And so I guess, man, as we're really getting into the details here, I would be curious to know from you what if you had any specific tips for somebody who is listening today on how to become implementer ready, as you put it, and then find that person. What would you tell them? What tips come to mind based on your own journey and experience?
So I think this is a really good rule for hiring anybody at all is if you can't define the problem and you don't have a solution for the problem, you can't hire somebody to solve the problem.
Mm,
Okay. And as an entrepreneur, so many times we're like, I'll just hire somebody to fix that for me. Well, that's abdicating, not delegating, right?
mm,
And so a better way to do it, and this always works for me because, as a visionary, that's what I do. I want to just go hire somebody to fix it. And it never works. And it ends up taking longer and costing more because I'm overwhelmed and I just want a quick fix and I want to be out from under that pressure. I want to be out from under that weight. Going through that process forces you, but in a more costly and more, a more time resource heavy way. But it forces you to think through it because when you go try to hire that person, it doesn't work. And then you're like, oh crap, I got to go back to the drawing board and figure this out so that I can find the right person. The reality is, especially with an integrator, be more aware. And I think this is a really good question for the person listening who doesn't have their integrator yet. Tell me what you do day to day. Okay. Show me, write it down. Tell me what your job description is. Tell me what your role is. What are your responsibilities? Right. And if you have to go turn your computer off and go away for a whole day just to have enough thinking time to be able to clearly define what you do day to day, if you don't have an implementer, chances are whatever you put down on that piece of paper as your role right now, those are the things that you're actually going to hand off.
mm,
Because if you don't have an implementer today, that means you're not operating as a visionary,
mm,
not a true visionary, right? Very likely your day-to-day activities are implementer activities.
mm,
You're in the team meetings and you're, managing team members and you're answering questions and you're troubleshooting and you're putting out fires and you're, checking in and following up on task and you're trying your best to beat the drum and make sure that your 90-day rocks get completed and your goals are. That's not your job. Those are all implementer things,
mm,
right? That those are not visionary things. And I think without that level of awareness, we don't even know that, right?
mm.
We think that that's the business owner's job, and it is up until a certain point because you're forced to wear both hats.
Right.
But there comes a point in your business where you have to uncouple those roles. And
Mm,
it's uncomfortable because you've never actually been in a true visionary seat.
mm,
You've never actually operated as a true visionary. And maybe a little here and a little there, but not full time, right?
mm,
And so part of the challenge is going to be separating those two roles, defining those responsibilities, getting really clear on a job description. And most likely you're sitting in that seat right now and you may not even know it, right? And so the clearer you can get on that, and the clearer you can write it down on paper and get it out of your head, the more clear you're going to be on who that person is that you need to go hire as your implementer. Or the more aware you're going to be when they show up, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's it right there.
That's them.
Right.
That's them. I love that you just said that, Justin, because I think there's a little bit of a myth in this conversation that it's kind of like a one size fits all thing. And this is, again, one of the reasons why I don't use the term integrator, even though I'm a huge raving fan of Gino Wickman and EOS, and worked in those communities, have tons of friends in there. But I think there's this misconception a little bit that there's a one size fits all solution for every business here. And as you and I even talked about, like, I've talked to business owners and they're like, oh, an integrator is this role. It's a COO, or it's an ops manager, or it's a president, or it's a this. And nobody seems to know what role it is. But the way I like to think about it is backtrack a little bit and go, just as no visionary is 100% like another visionary or entrepreneur, there is no one size fits all, implementer. And it also depends a little bit, like you said, on the stage of your business. And this is one of the reasons why when we work with a client, one of the very first exercises we work through with them and pull out of their brain is what we call the delegation game. It's exactly what you just shared, where it's like you literally have to pour from your head onto paper different categories of work you're doing right now and identify what you actually love to do and are great at, and what you don't love to do and aren't great at in your business. And when you have those sifted into those categories, it becomes pretty clear, in order to achieve your vision and continue to advance your vision, who you actually need to come alongside you, who can actually help you delegate out or even just take over some of those things you don't love to do and aren't great at, right? And so I think, man, it's so interesting. We've worked with clients where all the way from the extreme example of like the implementer they needed in the beginning came in and functioned as an executive assistant, and then over time graduated into more of like a senior management role, all the way up to, we've had owners who literally hire their implementer and their company's in such a state that they're like, I'm going on a 4-month vacation, like, see y'all later. And they just literally are like an owner. And the implementer is the president. And they run the day-to-day, and they're literally sitting in the owner's seat. So both of those are very extreme examples, but there's also a lot of room in between, right? For the implementer at a certain stage, I agree, can look different. And it also depends, right, on what is your unique ability, and where are the areas where you really need someone to come alongside of you. And I think that misconception keeps a lot of people back from actually doing the thing they know they need to do, because they just don't have clarity on what they need.
I would say, just to differentiate and clarify what you just spoke on, and this is my experience. I need to be careful saying this, but there's a difference between a personal assistant and an executive assistant.
Yeah,
and it's really important. It's really important for you to differentiate that. As a brand new entrepreneur, I think it's easy, because you call yourself the CEO. It's easy for you to hire a personal assistant and want to call them an executive assistant, right?
Yeah.
And that has gotten me in a lot of trouble over the years. Okay, because just because they're your personal assistant doesn't mean they're operating at an executive level. Okay. 100%. A personal assistant is more of a 2D thinker, where a true executive is always going to be a 3D thinker, right?
Yes.
If they're not a 3D thinker, they are not an executive assistant. And if you try to take a personal assistant and make them your implementer, you are going to suffer extreme consequences. And these are some hard lessons that I've had to learn along the way. And part of the reason why it took me, 6 years to find my implementer is just through trial and error because I didn't know any better. I wanted to make everybody on our team that, came along my implementer, you know, our developer. Okay, you're my implementer. Nope, that
Yep.
doesn't work. Took
Nope.
me 6 months to figure it out. Okay, who's next? You're my assistant. I'm going to make you my implementer. Nope, that didn't work. 6 more months down the drain. And I did that over and over and over. Again, I just, these are the hard lessons that I had to learn. And, I'm with you, Richard. Like, I would love to be able to help other entrepreneurs shortcut this process and learn from my mistakes, because I look across our local community, and I'm sure you can do the same. You see a lot of really nice businesses that are adding value to the community, and they're beloved by their customers, and they have a place, but they get stuck. And you see the owner, when you go in, running themselves ragged, wearing all the hats, driving themselves into the ground, and struggling because they never graduate beyond being the implementer in their own business. And they're not an implementer, they're a visionary,
They're
and
not even good at it.
they never they never cross over that threshold,
Mhm.
and they end up being the implementer in their business. And that's why, it's so rare to see entrepreneurs actually, end up being owners instead of operators. Most entrepreneurs get stuck as the operator, and that's not their wheelhouse, that's not their unique ability, that's not their core competency, it's not their strength. And there's so much more that they could be experiencing as a business owner, and there's so much more that their business could be doing, and so much more value that could be had through that, through that organization, that never gets realized. And it's because of this process that they get stuck as an operator, and they don't realize the difference.
Mm. So good, man. I think my parting shot on this from summarizing what we all basically said today is, you know, at some point, everyone listening here has to make a choice, especially if you've been in business for a couple of years and you're exactly where Justin described today. And you literally have to make a choice about who you're going to be. And it really does start with that place of identity and vision, where you're like, hey, am I actually content to run myself ragged and to, potentially do harm to the most important relationships in my life because I'm unwilling to let go of control and I'm scared to step into my true unique ability and actually allow people around me? Because the instant someone makes that identity shift from chief everything officer to unleashed CEO, and they truly begin to actually cast the vision that they truly have, I see over and over again when we help our clients do that, along with some of the systems and processes that we put in place, it suddenly when the student is ready, the master will appear. When the visionary is ready, the implementer will appear. I'm always shocked by clients who come into our process and they're like, "Oh no, this is going to take forever, and I'm so uncertain, I'm not sure." And then a month later, they're like, holy smokes, like, we found them and they're perfect. And it's like, yeah, but the reason is, over the last month, you've been in an environment where via osmosis you've picked up a new identity. You've been around other unleashed CEOs and you've gotten to see and look and feel and taste what that looks like. You've started to cast a compelling vision to your team. You've put that out to the market, and because you made space for that role in your company and were willing to let go of control, now you can actually be in charge and allow somebody else to come in where you're weak so you can focus on where you're strong. And so, Justin, thank you so much, man, for sharing your journey and your experience today. If there's anything you could tell just before we wrap to the people who are listening, who are struggling with what we talked about today, any last parting words from you before we wrap today's episode?
So if you're a visionary, you probably are silently struggling with this deep desire to be a creator, to create more content, to build your brand, to start a podcast, to do more videos, to be more involved in your marketing, to be a thought leader. like deep down, that's what a visionary desires. I think it's innate within us. And the reality is, if you're trapped in operations right now, it's creating so much, weight, and such a heavy burden because you can't get to those things. You don't have the capacity to do those things. You don't have the capacity to be that person because you're locked and trapped in the day-to-day operations. And so if you're ever going to become that or do that or contribute at that level, you have to find an implementer. You have to. Otherwise, you're going to be trapped in the day to day forever. And you're never going to realize those dreams. You're never going to realize those ambitions. You're never going to write that book. You're never going to, do all those cool things. Maybe there's another business. Maybe there's something that, is related to ministry or contributions to the community or other cool things that you deeply desire, even that is part of your calling or part of your mission or part of your identity. And the reality is, the longer you wait to find that implementer, the more, the harder it's going to be, or the more that those other things are going to escape you. And so at some point, you have to make the decision to let go of the operations and the day to day, and you have to realize that's not your calling. That's not your strength. Somebody else out there is better equipped. Somebody else out there is better skilled, and the reality is there's a big difference between being the owner and being the operator. Right. And when the quicker that come to terms with that, it doesn't make you any less of an owner. It actually makes you a stronger, more empowered owner. Right. Is that you don't have to manage the team. You don't have to manage the day to day. You don't have to be in the weeds. You don't have to be bogged down and heavy burden and come home stressed out and, be unavailable for your family at night and, on the verge of burnout all the time. Like, those are the signs that you're a visionary in an operator's role, or an implementer's role. And you need somebody to come in and start taking those things off your plate. And so for me, first of all, Grayson is somebody that I've known for years and years and years. We go to church together. We have the same values. We have the same worldview. We have the same, vision for the kingdom. We share the same burden for the kingdom. So as far as our values as far as our values go, we're super aligned. We're both submitted to the same man of God. We both look to the same man of God to be our covering and our leader. We're in the same body of Christ together. We're both committed to the body of Christ. We're both in ministry. And, at the end of the day, it's, I think another thing that him and I have talked about, it's like a brain and heart relationship, right? So the visionary is the brain, or the head. The visionary is the one who goes out and sees the future and, lives in the future. The heart is the one that comes in and nurtures the team, and they nurture the people. They nurture what is. That's really the difference between the head and the heart. If you're all head, you're not going to get very far. If you're all heart, you're not going to get very far. But the reality is, even though the head and the heart are two separate, entities, at the same time, with this visionary integrator role, they become one, and the head and the heart operate together as one. They're not two separate entities. And so, I would just encourage you, start making space, just like Richard said. When you begin to do the work internally, and you're willing to do the work, and you're willing to let go, and you're willing to introspect, and you're willing to study yourself and learn and become and let go, and you're willing to make space for that person, they'll show up.
So good, man. Thanks for sharing with us and with our community today, Justin. And for those of you guys who are watching, thanks for being part of today's episode. And I'm really excited that if you take what you applied today and began to put it into practice, man, you're going to be able to elevate to that role of Unleashed CEO and find your implementer. And if you want our team's help to expedite that process, I just want to encourage you, we have a proven process to free up 30 hours a week for you to focus on growth by finding that missing link in your team. and bringing you in partnership with an implementer and actually training that person and you to work on some of the systems that will put a self-managing team into action, freeing you up to focus on growth. So if you want more information on that, drop a comment below. Let us know. Our team would be happy to reach out. And Justin, I just want to say to you again, thank you so much for sharing your journey and experience. And I'm so excited for you as you have new business adventures ahead, more time with family, and exponential growth that continues to lie ahead of you because of this, man. Thanks for today.
Thanks, Richard. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be in touch soon. Go be the leader that your business and your family needs today. And don't forget to show up powerfully as the visionary CEO of your company. All right, y'all. Have a great day. Talk soon.